A wrong explanation does not always feel wrong. Very often it feels cleaner, faster, and more emotionally satisfying than the truth. It gives experience a shape before understanding has earned one. It reduces the discomfort of ambiguity. It lets the mind stop searching. And because it relieves uncertainty so efficiently, it can be mistaken for insight. A patient comes in with fatigue, poor sleep, palpitations, and the growing fear that something serious is wrong. The tests are reassuring. Nothing alarming appears. Then a phrase arrives, quickly, almost gratefully. Stress. Sometimes that explanation is correct. Sometimes it is simply the first story that can gather scattered facts into a shape that feels bearable. The patient leaves with less uncertainty, but not necessarily with more truth. This is one of the quiet vulnerabilities in human thinking. We usually assume that people fail to recognize truth because reality is too complex, too subtle, too difficult to understand. But just as often, the deeper problem is different. A partial explanation becomes persuasive long before it has been tested rigorously enough. It feels right because it organizes experience quickly. And once experience is organized, the mind begins to treat coherence as evidence. That is the move I want to name: coherence as evidence. It is one of the most common errors we make and one of the hardest to notice, because the error feels exactly like understanding. Human beings do not seek truth alone. We also seek orientation, predictability, relief. A good explanation does more than describe reality. It reduces the strain of not knowing what reality means. That is why premature explanations can be so powerful. They do not just answer a question. They calm the person who is burdened by uncertainty. Explanation, in this sense, is never only intellectual. It is also regulatory. A story about what is happening to us can change how exposed we feel, how confused we feel, even how much fear we can tolerate. The danger begins when the relief produced by the label is quietly mistaken for proof that the label is fully true. You can see this in the ordinary way people reach for the nearest available account of themselves. Exhaustion becomes burnout. Inner restlessness becomes ADHD. Emotional distance becomes trauma. Hormonal fluctuation becomes a total explanation for psychic life. Sometimes these accounts are helpful. Sometimes they are deeply clarifying. But sometimes they function as early closure devices, ways of turning diffuse, unsettling experience into something linguistically manageable. The most durable explanations are rarely pure inventions. They survive because they touch something real. They name a pattern, capture a fragment, describe one layer of what is happening. Their power comes precisely from that partial validity. But once an explanation becomes familiar enough, fluent enough, and emotionally useful enough, its limits begin to disappear from view. What started as a tool becomes a lens. What started as a lens becomes a world. Truth is often slower. It is often narrower than we want. It comes with conditions, caveats, probabilities, revisions. It leaves some things unresolved. Premature coherence feels better because it gives more than reality has yet authorized. It offers completion where only partial understanding exists. That is why wrong explanations can feel better than right ones. Right explanations do not always feel generous at first contact. They may require waiting, further observation, competing hypotheses, the discipline of leaving some things open. A better explanation may therefore feel weaker in the beginning, not because it is less true, but because it is less total. This may be one of the deepest reasons half-truths endure. A half-truth does not need to be completely wrong to become dangerous. It only needs to become complete in the imagination. Its power comes from reducing uncertainty before it has earned that power. The real discipline, then, is not only learning how to explain, it is learning how not to close too early. It is learning to notice when an explanation is doing emotional work that exceeds its evidentiary strength. It is learning to ask not only, is this plausible, but also, why does this feel so relieving to believe? What discomfort is it removing? What complexity becomes harder to see once I adopt it? These are not questions against explanation. They are questions in defense of better explanation. We need concepts, diagnoses, frameworks, narratives. We cannot think without them. But we think badly when we forget that explanation is always vulnerable to overreach, especially when it arrives bearing relief. One of the most important forms of intellectual maturity is the ability to remain near uncertainty long enough to let a truer explanation emerge, even when a more satisfying one is already available. Some of our most consequential mistakes begin exactly there, at the point where relief is mistaken for understanding, and coherence arrives before truth.